Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It has been a long week of recovery. It was a long weekend at North American Championships or Continentals, whatever you want to call it. I think they ended up wanting to call it North American Championships, but it was Continentals for everyone else involved, so who knows. But yeah, it was a ton of fun. I didn't do as well as I'd hoped in the main event, but did well on the second day in the revival tournament. So we're going to go over what I played on, I guess, both days, what I would change and going forward for any kind of set championships that are happening, and yeah, what to do and what to improve, and maybe some sample hands in a little bit here if we can get those done. But yeah, so this is what I played. No surprise here. Dwarven Mine was what I played at the North American Continentals. I didn't think that audibling to get any kind of advantage against someone who might know what I was playing was worth it when I thought that this was the best deck. I just took some cards and made a little bit of what I think are improvements to the deck in a more widespread metagame or more narrow one depending on how you look at it. I did play against a fair variety of matchups throughout the entire weekend, so it was kind of cool to see people kind of stuck to their guns and all kinds of decks show up despite best of two being what it is. So big changes. There's no more Plutos. I replaced them with Svens. I found Sven to be a bit better against some of the more Amethyst decks just because they were moving towards Merlin Crab. And Sven doesn't really care about Crab. It kind of just readies whatever you don't want to get challenged anyway, so you don't have to worry about losing your card to a Crab being deployed, where Pluto would just probably get eaten by any small character that gets crabbed, like a Flynn or something, which is normally not something you want to worry about. I'm still playing the Kitas. I removed one Kita from the main list. I removed actually two Calhouns, which is where we see some of the other cards come into play here. That the more notable ones is the one Gantu and the one Cinderella. So those kind of became more inkable cards. I wanted to go up to 14. Calhoun, I think, ultimately probably should be around 3 of in the deck. I don't think 4 is needed, but it is a very powerful card, and it's really a card that, especially going second helps you win a lot of games. Just having a sturdy body and making so you can kind of win the lower race keep up in the lower race while not falling behind challenging. So really good card. I think 3 is about where I want to be for Calhoun. But let's talk about Gantu and Cinderella. So I think ultimately I'd rather have 2 Gantus. I think Gantu is a pretty solid character, especially into cards like Maui Shark. The reason why it's good into Maui Shark is because often what happens if you're facing a Maui Shark, you have to kind of sit there and build up amount of lore to quest in one turn to kind of force the be prepared from it to happen there, so they have to get rid of their own Maui Shark. Because questing into one is very scary, and unless you have a Pete kind of making your day a lot easier with them not being able to play any actions when they try and challenge in and a wide board already, it's not really going to do very well for you. And Gantu is quite good, I would say, against some of the Ruby Amethyst decks as well. Hard for them to kill. Medusa doesn't hit it. Brawl doesn't hit it. Elsa, if they have Elsa and Genie in play, they have to send in the Genie as well as Elsa to kill the Gantu, so it's pretty hard for them to get rid of in a lot of situations. And 4 lore is no joke. I think people who are more experienced sometimes get away from the vanilla cards being good, but vanilla cards can be very good. Stats do matter, and lore does matter, and this is a ton of lore. I played 1 copy of Cinderella Stout-Hearted, and I think it was more, I wasn't really planning on or having it in my deck to consistently play it when I draw it, shift it all the time, but I really wanted to ink it. It sounds strange, right? You really want to ink a card in your deck? Yes. So I really wanted my opponents to make mistakes. I think one of the best ways to win games in Lorcana is to have your opponent make mistakes, because mistakes can be very punishing. I think if both players play perfectly, it's hard to gain too much of an edge unless you're doing some kind of misdirection or making your opponent make a bunch of judgment calls, which are ultimately can lead to mistakes. Judgment calls are primarily the reason that I lose games. I make a call based on what the information I have, and I weigh the odds on what's going to happen one way or another, and it doesn't work out. That's how I lose. That's how a lot of people lose. That's just how the game is played. There's so much going on and so much information being given every turn by what quests, what's played, what's inked, how things are played, the order in which things happen. Tons of information happen in the game. So I wanted to make my opponent have to consider even more information with Cinderella Stout-Hearted. If I ink it, they have to respect the 1-cost Cinderella even more. We're a closed deck list. We don't know what our opponent's playing. We don't know how many copies of them they're playing. They don't know if I have 2 or 3. They have no idea. Maybe it's just the 1. Do you want to risk it? Do you brawl a Cinderella over, a card like Happy when I have a Dwarven Mine going because you really are scared of the Cinderella? Do you brawl the Cinderella over something like a damaged Lawrence, which, the questing part might matter, but in some situations they might choose to hit the Cinderella. And that did happen in one of my rounds. My opponent, respected the Cinderella that they actually did lose to. I did manage to shift it in the first game, and then the second game they actually just respected the Cinderella a lot more. They had no idea how many I was playing, and I was going into my turn 5, so they were just kind of scared. So that did work out. You can also see here one of the main differences is there's 2 copies of Simba Future King. It is a bit more misdirection, much like the Cinderella, where I wanted my opponent to respect the potential. I have the shift Simba line. Additionally, it is not the worst one drop. I wanted one more one drop in the deck, but I did not want to play the fourth Happy. Happy is a little bit anemic in the late game. It's not very exciting. It's a fine card, and it can be very good at crafting strategies early when you're developing a mine on turn 2 to help combat opposing Cinderellas or something like that, where you can on turn 2 play the mine, turn 3 play Happy and move it there, shoot something for 2, and it's pretty good. But I wanted Simba to kind of help smooth out the draws a little bit. Sure, you can discard Lilo. I don't do that as often as you might think. I think that Lilo is just a better card usually played and having to be dealt with the first time and then being brought back. But sometimes you discard Lilo because you have enough Inkables in your hand being played out for itself. That does happen. But more often than I'm in situations where things are a little tight, I might have to discard an uninkable card that's bad in the situation and then play the Lilo out or ink the Lilo. It doesn't really matter all the time. But yeah, I played Simba. I liked Simba. It was totally fine. It's a card that Ambersteel aggro has kind of always wished it could play. The big Simba, the I don't know what the exact name is, the 4/4 that untaps all your characters when it's exerted at the end of your turn, is a big threat, and some people do have to respect it. It didn't happen to where my opponent had to respect it. Simba actually kind of backfired in one situation where I had no cards in hand and just drew in discard hoping to find a Lilo, and I found a dock, and that was not ideal because I had to discard it immediately, and it was like the fourth dock. It was bad times. But anyway, my tournament did not go very well. I did draw pretty poorly, I would say. In the main event, I think in the first 4 rounds, I had 4 games in the first 4 rounds, so one of each of the matches I played, where I drew a third dock before being able to play one. And in none of those games did I keep a single dock, so it was pretty awkward at how I could deploy things. And I also had a game in the mirror match, which I'm going to get to the record here. I'm going to put that up on the side here. Round 3, where I played against someone I previously was coaching. Good player, very well deserved. They got there, I think, in Seattle or maybe Vegas. I can't recall exactly when they qualified, but they're playing Ambersteel, Mufasa. I think some songs in there as well. But I just didn't have a 1-drop either game. And when you have 12 1-drops and you hard mulligan 4 of them, you're about 97% to hit one. So I got a little unfortunate there. Any piece of cardboard in play would have done wonders for me in either game that I played. Just simply one strength in play would have made a big difference at the entirety of the game, of how they could play and how I was able to play. So a little unfortunate in that sense. The Ruby Sapphire in round 2 was also kind of unfortunate. I think it was at 19 lore both games, and a couple judgment calls and specific cards, in the last few turns of the game could have gone either which way to have me win, but it happens, right? I'm not here to say, oh, boo is me, I got unlucky, I deserve to win. No one deserves anything in this game. You don't deserve to win, you don't deserve prizes, you don't deserve matches. Don't get in that mentality, because that's going to lead to people feeling entitled, and entitlement does kind of create some bad things in this game, so I wouldn't get to that mentality. But it was a fun event. I liked my deck. I decided that on the second day, we're going to go through here, Ruby Amethyst, I won round 1. I drew pretty well in the mid game. I think I docked into Akita to end the second game after winning game 1 on the play pretty quickly. Round 2 wasn't great. Round 3 also wasn't great. Ruby Sapphire round 3 was a little bit awkward draws. I think I just kind of petered out. I think I drew all the 1 lore characters in my deck. I think I drew all 4 Cinderellas, Happies, and Simbas before I drew a single, I think, into Calhoun against Ruby Sapphire, before I drew a single dock or Pete to help me survive the game, or mine even I could play. I think I had to ink a mine to play something out at some point, but yeah, it was a little awkward draws. And Ambersteel songs, we split games. There was a point where I was looking good in the second game after winning game 1, where I was doing great, but then they drew Whole New World and then played 5 1-drops and Zeus my character, and then had another Whole New World in hand. And I was like, well, that's just how you draw it up. I get it. Bad for me. And round 6, played against Sapphire Steel. Really close set of games. Game 1, I think they conceded on turn 3. And game 2 was a little bit more in their court to kind of play how they wanted when they were going first. I think I had some agency over how it went, but it's a little bit difficult when there's a lot of characters in play. I think they had a lot of good removal in certain spots. They're playing a lot more low-cost characters like Smees and Calhouns to combat my deck specifically, so a little unfortunate. And Ruby Sapphire in the last round, I kind of had the nuts both games, and I think I kept 7 one time, and it just wasn't really close. So unfortunate showing into Ruby Sapphire, personally for me. I think it's a matchup where it's quite good. In the second day, I played a similar deck, which we'll get to here, and I did, I think, not lose to it once. So yeah, it was a little disappointing, but hey, it happens. I got to compete, met a lot of people, ton of fun watching the LCQs, was rooting as best I could for all the people I could watch. Sometimes we weren't allowed to watch for whatever reason in the earlier rounds, and that's just how it goes. It was a little bit awkward at times, but anyway, let's move on to the second day. a little more interesting, I think. I think we've seen the Dwarven Mine deck, and I think we've seen how it performs and what it does and how its place in that game is, and it's still quite good. I mean, I'm heavily considering it playing in an upcoming tournament in I think a couple weeks, which is going to be one of the last events for this format I do play. It's going to be at Southside Gaming. There's a 10K and a 5K in the same weekend they're hosting on February 8th, which will be streamed, so watch it there. I'll probably have a link to it in my Discord, so if you guys want to check it out there. But let's move on. This was Continentals. Oh well, 2, 2, and 3. Not the worst record, but not the best record. I mean, 23 points isn't really anything very good. But hey, what are you gonna do? Can't win them all, right? Well, we can. We can kind of win them all if we try a bit differently, different things here. And I decided to have some fun. The Revival tournament was purely for promotional cards. I think if you did really, really well, basically the record I had, you got something worth your time, but anything below that, really, you're playing for about 4 Dragonfires, which have some monetary value, sure, but you really only have to win, I think, 3 games in 7 rounds to get that value point, so not too hard to get. And I almost didn't want to play, so I decided to play a fun deck, right? I decided to say, hey, I'm going to go to the event site early, scour around for copies of Stitch, Stitch 6, Stitch 1, I don't have any Simba 2s, and I don't have any Pride Lands with me. I have everything else with me because I considered playing them this weekend, but I didn't consider this deck. I said, I want to have some fun. I like Pride Lands. This deck is a little bit higher on the uninkables. There's 17 uninkables, but I think you're okay because some of your uninkables are cards you just really want to play all the time, and you have 4 copies of Simba Future King to discard extra uninkables in mid-game spots, but let's go through what's going on here. So, Pride Lands. Pride Lands cost reduces your characters if there's a prince or a king. The only princes or kings are the Simbas in the deck. There's no other ones that are really worth playing. The only one that's notable, I think, that exists in the game, to my knowledge, or that I can think of at the top of my head, is Benja. Benja's a king, and Mufasa, I guess, is a king too. Or I think he's a mentor king. Is he a mentor king? Probably. But these are the ones I decided to include. You don't need too many. Pride Lands is still a good threat. It survives the Maui Hero of All challenge when it's being rushed down. It doesn't survive Mim Fox getting crabbed, but hey, what can you do? So what do you do with this deck? Well, this deck plays a lot bigger cards, and I'm going to go through step by step on pieces of it, and we'll kind of recap at the end here with what the deck kind of looks like again. So step 1, kind of my favorite thing to do in the game, things that give you the most agency when you're going second to still win, Cindy Storm Strength. Amber Steel is probably going to be pigeonholed to starting with these 12 cards, that color pair of these 12 cards for probably its entire existence. Even if you're trying to do things like Mufasa, the 5-cost Mufasa that flips the top card if it's a character, I still would probably include these cards because you just have to. You have to be able to interact. Interaction is the name of the game, and since we don't have any reach, meaning cards like Merlin Goat, Gather Knowledge and Wisdom, or the White Rose, you need to be able to answer things that are in play. You need to be able to answer genies, and Cinderella, Storm, and Strength are among the best cards in the game. You're going to have to, pry them from my cold dead fingers for me not to play them in Amber Steel. I don't think it's possible. I wouldn't recommend it. Here we are. So not much explanation needed with that here. So let's move on to the second area here where we go through the package. We kind of highlighted, the Simbas and the Future King and the Pride Land. So what do we try to do with this deck? Our best overall opening that's not defensive based is proactive based when you're going first, where you play Simba Future King on turn 1, draw and discard something, helps smooth out your draw a little bit. Maybe a second copy of Pride Lands isn't that great. Turn 2, we play our Pride Lands, okay? We have a 1-drop and a location to play. Location pretty hard to kill. I don't think it's possible for it to die on turn 2. Realistically, especially if you're going first. So turn 3, we can move our Simba Future King, assuming it lives, into the Pride Lands. Or if you're afraid of it dying to a card like Let the Storm Rage on, you simply play a different 1-drop on turn 1, and on turn 2 you play Pride Lands. Turn 3 you play the Simba and move it into the Pride Lands so it never has a chance to die to a card like Let the Storm Rage on. Something you can do if you're a little fearful of that in any kind of matchup where you're playing against Let the Storm Rage on. But at that point, all your characters get discounted by 1. Yes, even 0. They go down to 0 if they cost 1. So from there, on turn 3, let's assume that we were a little afraid to let the Storm Rage on. We played our Simba on turn 3. We moved it to the Pride Lands. We have no ink available. We play any number of 1-drops we want from that point. If you played Simba on turn 1 and moved it here on turn 3, you have 1 ink left over. You can play any number of 1-drops and a 2-drop. So if you can empty your hand really fast, if you have all 1-drops, or you're able to ink in a way where you're down to just a few 1-drops left, you can play them all and play a dock. And then your hand's empty, redraw 2. How many characters you had in play is how many you get to play. Pretty strong. The 2-cost Simba is more just added bonus. It's the best prince or king that costs 2. 3 health is always important, and of course those who remember from set 1, Simba Bodyguard was amazing. Basically until Mim Fox was printed, this card was played pretty much everywhere, but Mim Fox kind of invalidated it in a lot of ways, and there are ways that I'm sure we'll eventually come back to playing a card like this if there's ways to buff princes or kings. There's a couple of them in Amber. I think the Duke is buffing a prince or king, but not really heavily played, but maybe, who knows. Fine filler, right? It's inkable. It fulfills the need we want, and sometimes it can be great. The Shift Simba, so Simba Pride Protector. It is fine. It's not a card you absolutely need in the deck, honestly. If you don't have them, I don't worry about it too much. It's a good threat to have, and it does help facilitate some late game plans, whereas you're able to play, we'll get to a card later, Rockstar Stitch, one of my favorites, and everything that comes off to play after that is exerted, if you want to draw cards with it, which you do, and this Simba readies all of them, so they can't actually touch them. So it's a pretty good 2 of. Again, only 2 of because it's uninkable. If there was inkable, we'd play 4 for sure. But at uninkable, it's a little bit difficult to fit too many in. And while we do have 4 cards we're playing for sure that we can shift onto, or sorry, 8 cards, it's still only a 2 of. Its effect does require really a shift for it to be good. Playing this card for 5 ink is not nearly as good as playing a card like Kida or Robin Hood was, Champion of Sherwood. Those are just cards that are fine on turn 5. This one, not so much. Kida has an immediate effect, and Robin Hood's very hard to remove and has a kind of steady stream of impactful lines down the line with what you can do, and especially with the decline of Medusa, which is a big part of this deck too. So that's kind of the combo part where you put one of these on there and you're playing a bunch of cheap characters, throw them all in there. So how do we draw cards with this? Well, we go to our kind of mainstays here. We see Rapunzel and Doc from Dwarven Mines, the Diggy Diggy Hole. We have those kind of engines there, the best 2 cards in Amber Steel to draw cards, the only ones that really do say draw cards in a character-based driven way. I guess Surfer Stitch is one too. But yeah, max out on Rapunzel's, max out on Docs. This deck's not playing a Whole New World. I have had versions of this deck in the past which played Whole New World, but it's a little clunky, and I didn't really want to have those things kind of mess up my hands and also give my opponent 7 cards, which can be a little bit scary at times. So what do we get to do? We have Rapunzel and Doc, which we can make use of greatly with Pride Lands twofold. Doc, because our hand gets easier to deploy since all of our characters are cheaper, and Rapunzel because any character at the Pride Lands has more health to then heal to get more cards from Rapunzel. So they both work with Pride Lands pretty well, right? Well, we have on top of that Stitch, Rockstar Stitch, one of my all-time favorite cards. I was not at all disappointed to have to buy 4 more. I probably should own 100 at this point because I love the card. My favorite Disney character, one of my favorite characters from set 1. Why is this in our deck? I thought this was out of the metagame. 3/5, pretty vulnerable to Medusa, right? Well, if you look at most of the decks that are playing Ruby in the Continental event, or from the Continental event was my kind of frame of reference for who I'm playing in, since it was the same field of players, no one was really playing Medusa. I think there was one Medusa in the top 16 of Continentals in all the Ruby decks that existed there, maybe one. Sure, Iceblock Sisu Brawl, sure, that happens. You're going to get brawled at some point, but I don't think they can afford to hold on to Brawl for Stitch. They'd probably have to have brawled my cards we're going to see up here next. I just don't see it happening. And Sisu, sure, happens. We can deal with that if in May, and hopefully when I play the Stitch, I also play a bunch of characters to make sure the Sisu doesn't matter as much to me because I have a handful of cards to reload. But the fact that there's not as many Medusa, and as well, the more common version of Amber Steel we're seeing now is the Dwarven Mine deck, which I was surprised by and kind of flattered by, that most of the people playing Amber Steel in Continentals in the LCQs were on Dwarven Mine. It was actually a majority by comparison to the archetype. That deck actually doesn't play a card that can kill this, really, except for Strength of the Raging Fire. It has a Long Came Zeus, and that's basically it. That's the card I was the most scared of when you play Rockstar Stitch, is that your opponent has a 4 cost in play. You were going second. They played a 4-drop. You shifted this into play, hope it survives. They sing with their 4-drop Zeus on your character, and they keep going, and you're way far behind. You've lost 2 cards to their 1. You didn't get to draw any cards, and they just got to deploy a 5-cost card as well. So that's a big nightmare for Stitch as well. But with Dwarven Mine being the more popular version of Amber Steel, and other decks kind of like Sapphire Steel not playing Long Came Zeus, or maybe having a couple copies, and that deck not being as big part of the metagame as it may have once been, or the fact that, I guess the Amethyst Steel deck that Zach Bivens played had 4 Zeus with 4 strengths, but I wasn't sure that people were going to adapt to that specifically. More versions of Amethyst Steel I've seen have been on Strength Raging Fire and Fire the Cannons, smaller things like that. I was pretty sure that Stitch was going to live most of the time it was in play, and it did. I don't think my Stitch has died ever. I played against a plethora of decks, which we'll get to here in a moment, and I just didn't have Stitch die very often. And when it did, it was because I let it die. I was allowing it to quest into Maui's just because I felt like the game was going to end. And in a lot of situations, when you quest with it, you can also pair it with the Simba Protective Cub, defend it with the Bodyguard. A great way to protect it from an Elsa too is the Simba, the 2-cost Simba. So yeah, I'm lumping in the 1-cost Stitch here because it's part of the shift line. It's card by card drop package. It's a very threatening character, and I want to highlight briefly that the Stitch New Dog impressed me in more than one way, aside from being somewhat of a lightning rod. Having played with Dwarven Mine this entire set, I forgot how good 1-cost 2/2s can be. Strange, right? The card Smee was a card that in the Dwarven Mine deck is actually kind of hard to deal with. You have to storm it or trade with something that has 3 strength. It doesn't really have anything to really work with very well, and Happy while in the deck for Dwarven Mines, it's a little bit awkward to use at times because it is vulnerable just to any character being moved to the mine, so you can't play one into a mine. But a 2/2 you could play into just fine, and it just sat there on the board and traded with Smees or traded with kind of anything, and it was impressive. Just the 1-cost 2/2. I'm not saying that means I want to play a bunch more 1-cost 2/2s that don't do anything. This one, of course, has an impressive shift line, but it's something to note that I think the more things change, the more things kind of stay the same, where maybe going back to versions of Amber Steel decks that have just 1-cost 2/2s that have some kind of shift lines, maybe not quite whole new world shift lines, but other shift lines that you can play just for more value characters like Robin Hood or even Stitch in the right deck. So this is our card draw engine. You'll notice I think this deck is actually better against blue-red because it has more ways to draw cards. More cards, sure, you don't have Lawrence. That's the biggest difference point I'd say from this deck. Dwarven Mine is actually the absence of Lawrence. Dwarven Mine, it's fine. It helps deal with Sisus, small Sisus, the 1/1 Sisus against blue-red, but the Pride Land survives a Maui hit, Maui hero to all, not Shark, and also lets you draw a bunch more cards when you have Stitch in play, which is I think a lot easier than it otherwise has been in the past. So this was my card draw package. I loved it all weekend long. I had definitely explosive turns where sometimes in the mirror match it's hard to really break stalemates, but the card Stitch Rockstar can do that just well because it turns basically everything in your deck into a cantrip effect where you just get to keep going and going and going. And while sometimes it's not great to have exerted characters to allow your opponent to Rapunzel, who cares if you have 12 characters in play if they drew 3 cards, really? You know, they're not going to catch up from that kind of thing. So that was my logic, and that's why I played this card here. So next up, I'm going to hide the Pete here. So the last kind of section of the deck is the lore section. We have these heavy lore characters. We have Daisy, Lilo, Piglet, Smee. Only 3 Daisies, mainly for the uninkable count. I actually wouldn't want to play Daisy in this kind of deck. It doesn't really fulfill the same kind of purpose as a lot of their cards. The lore part is fine. The 1/4 body is really what I like about it. And I think you kind of need this effect against blue-red to exist and kind of help, fight the good fight in a lot of ways. And also you'll find that Daisy is much more of a controlling card in the Amber Steel mirror matches. You use it to kind of poke at 3/3s that have turned sideways to then be Rapunzel to help kind of grind from that standpoint. Much less of a quester in that situation unless you can get really far ahead, which can happen, especially if you miss your 1-drop, Brennan. Missed your 1-drop, your opponent just quested with Daisy and filled your hand with 12 cards, and it didn't matter. I discarded like 5 cards to Dock and Continentals just because I had to keep digging. Fun times. But yeah, I like this split here. Daisy, Lilo, Piglet, Smee. I still like 4 Lilos and 3 Piglets. Lilo is very important against the cards like Be Prepared, Lady Tremaine, things like that to help beat Ruby Amethyst. Not necessarily saying Ruby Amethyst is a difficult matchup in my opinion, especially with this deck compared to Dwarven Mines. I think this deck has a much better chance against that deck, especially if they're not playing Medusa. That deck has no answers to Stitch, really. They have to Elsa it, but if you're playing Edmund Chu's deck, he just has nothing. He has Be Prepared, and that's it. That's the only way he can remove Rockstar Stitch is Be Prepared, which is kind of incredible to think about. If you think about how the deck plays and how that matchup used to be. They have no way to shrink characters. He had no Elsas, no Mauis. He just had Be Prepared, and that was it. And that would have been an incredible matchup if I got to play against it, which, of note, I will say, I believe Edmund Chu went, split games or won every best of 3 in the top 16. The only time he got 2-0'd was by Amber Steel, and I believe it was Dwarven Mine he played against when he played against it. So kudos to him for picking a deck and getting the matchups he wanted. Great run, awesome player. And yeah, this section here, I'm kind of throwing in this last little bit because it's one card, the kind of tech cards, the hate cards. Pete's going to be a mainstay in Steel for quite a while, especially if you're aggressively slanted. Pete just preventing actions. People have moved closer to cards like How Far I'll Go in blue-red, and things like that when you can time it perfectly, just fully take a turn away. I've had many times where I played Pete against blue-red. They've just played an ink and passed. That was their only thing they could do because they had How Far I'll Go. They were trying to sing it after developing a Tala on turn 4 or turn 3 if they're going first, or a Hiram in some situations. They have no items, and then it's passed. They don't have as many Mauis as they used to. They don't have anything else to do on turn 5. They have no Quills to jump past those curves, so Pete is here to stay, and Pete helps you ice games out completely. So let's go back to the original set here. You look at the matchups I played against. So round 1, we actually had no opponents. A lot of people had no opponents because everyone who was entered into the main event was automatically entered to this event. They didn't have to sign up. They were just paired based off of that. But I did play against Din King Pham. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies if it's not. DKP. European player, plays a lot of Ruby Sapphire. And we both didn't have opponents. We were sitting next to each other. Let's play some games, right? So we played. He was playing Ruby Sapphire. I was playing my deck. I think that I won the first game going first. Then I let him go first, I think 3 times in a row, and he still lost all the games against the deck, where it was just the fact that there's so many things and so many cards go wide, and it's really hard for him to kind of keep up in a lot of cases. And we were playing for fun, so I'm counting it as a win because that's my only thing I played against round 1. My next match Amethyst Steel, I think they got ahead by a couple of Genies and Zeuses. The thing I was kind of worried about with the Zeus being so good, it was someone who still played the Zeus. They barely eked out a win in game 2, and I won the first one pretty handily. Game 3, I played against Dale. I'm bad with last names. Dale played a lot of Green Steel, sat next to me in Chicago. Great player. We split games. He had a really good sequence in the second game when he was going first, where he was able to use Muses with Sudden Chill, bounce a couple things, and had Prince John, and I had no cards in hand, and he basically got rid of a couple things for free. Close game. I will say, I think that the biggest difference for me between the Pride Lands deck and the Dwarven Mine deck is I think the Pride Lands deck is a little bit weaker to Green Steel. It is a little bit worse against the card Diablo because you don't have Dwarven Mine, you don't have Happy. Those two cards are pretty big in the differences there. I will say it's a bit harder, but you can still definitely win. I've played this deck before last format when people play Green Steel, and I played it in a version without actually any Stormlight Drowns or Strengths, and I still was able to win a couple times, against more localized players, but it still was a good set of games. But you can win there. That's pretty hard. The Muses is a beating against Amber Steel aggro, any versions of it, but Pete, someone who always got your back there, and Simba is quite good as well, the big Simba. Stitch, if it survives, is amazing. You don't really care how many cards they draw off Diablo if you can draw a bunch of cards and then end the sequence with a Pete. You can just ignore basically what they did because they can't challenge very well. So giving them a handful of cards and beating them doesn't matter. They should be dead the next turn. The next matchup I played against Ruby Sapphire. I think it was a really not close game 1 when I was going first. In game 2, I think I ripped a Pete on one of the last turns to seal the game. The matchup I think is quite good. Even better with this deck than Dwarven Mine if you're looking to play into a heavy Ruby Sapphire field. I would suggest this version of the deck. If you're really expecting to play against like 5 Ruby Sapphires in like a 6-round event or something like that, maybe remove the Cindy Storm Strength package and just play something else. I'm not sure if I'd cut them even then, because sometimes you need a Strength or Storm something of your own to draw cards with Rapunzel, and that's quite good. I don't know. Round 5, the Dwarven Mine deck, I kind of got to play against my own creation and beat it. And round 5 and 6, I think I lost one of the games because I needed a character that essentially was on very close to ending the game. They had developed a little bit of a board, and on one of the last turns of the game, I needed to draw any character that really did anything, or any location or a song would have been fine too. And I had 5 ink in play, and I drew Rockstar Stitch. I'm like, oh no, I can't play it. I just had to pass the turn back, and any lore I ended up at 19 would have been good enough. They didn't have a way to kill anything else in play, so a little unfortunate to not get the 2-0 there, but it was still fine. And the last round, I actually got to play against DKP, and we played in the last round, and they were not the closest games, it felt like. I think I kept 7 in game 2, and yeah, that was kind of it. So it was a very strong showing for the deck. Whether or not that means it's strictly better than Dwarven Mine, I don't know. I think you gain a lot of percentage points against both Ruby variants and the Mirror Match, so that's maybe a big knock in the right direction. But if people are playing a lot of Emerald Steel, and sometimes even more aggressive Genie slanted Amethyst Steel decks, having less answers to Genie because you don't have any mines, you really just have Strength at that point to answer the Genies, can be a bit of a hindrance. It can be a little bit of a downside to that. Not having Calhoun makes you a little bit worse at challenging things like Mine, but Mine kind of gets offset by Pride Lands. Lawrences are going to be better against you for sure, just because you don't have the ability to kind of ping them with the Mine. But you kind of care less about those kind of things when that's their only play on turn 3. And like I said, when you can sometimes play the Pride Lands on 2, having a symbol on 1, you can kind of go so wide it doesn't really matter what they do with Lawrence, and maybe even move something to the Pride Lands, then kind of challenge into the Lawrence, then finish it off with whatever else you have in play to make for really big Rapunzels. So I'm not too worried about it. I think the only matchup that again gets a bit worse would be Green Steel. That's one of the Emerald Steel is in one matchup that I think gets a bit worse. You can still definitely win going first. It's hard for him to catch up, but that deck is quite good at manhandling characters once it gets to turn 5 or so with Muses and Songs and Ursulas and things like that. So not having extra ways to remove it definitely does feel a bit worse, but it's a trade-off any which way you go in this game, whether or not you play whichever deck you decide to play in this game period. There's always going to be trade-offs in one way or another based on how your deck plays into one versus the other. That's kind of a cat and mouse game, kind of a rock paper scissors thing, but to a lesser degree I think we've gotten away from true rock paper scissors with this metagame. We've gotten to the point where there is play in the matchup to beat certain decks, although I will say I still think that Amber Steel, either Dwarven Mine or this Pride Lands deck, going first does not have a rival. Really, you don't have a matchup except a mirror match is the only thing that would make some sense, because I don't think going first is as important in the mirror match, which is very strange, but I think it's true. Yeah, except for that, it's really unparalleled when you go first. So Cinderella is a heck of a card, and so is Daisy Smee and all the cards that follow suit. But that was my event. I would recommend, if you want to have some fun, play this deck. I might be playing it. I went 4-0-3. You can see the record down below, beating a lot of red blue along the way, 2-0-3 times. I count it as 4 times because we played 4 games for the first round just for fun, and I still won them all. So who knows? But yeah, this has been this deck. Continentals was a lot of fun. I'm not going to be going to Australia. I thought I was going to have some chance to go, but I decided against it. It's just too far away, too much time. And while I'd love to go down under, it would just be too much time to plan and to get everything set up, and too costly. I would want to take my wife and child. We just would like to go on a trip, but it's a bit much on short notice. So not doing that. But who knows? Maybe they have 4 more slots they're going to do at Worlds to give away some which way. My thoughts on that is that they're probably just going to not do it and have 28 players, which is fine. Or there may be some variation of LCQ, but it might be only available to those who played in either North American or European Continentals at Disney the day before. So anyone who makes the trip there, there'll be kind of an LCQ from qualified players. We thought it might be something to do with the revival events, but that's too small to make a really determination on who should get the qualifications from the revival events. So who knows? We have no idea, no clue how it's going to work. Hopefully we get some information within the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm holding my breath until then as well. But I'm going to enjoy certainly watching all the qualified players. Congratulations to everyone who qualified. You guys did awesome. I loved the play I saw. There was, very few times where I was thinking that someone made a misstep in any kind of way watching the coverage. Fantastic play most of the entire weekend. Loved all the people who are qualified. Congratulations to all of them. I would love to be among you, but I'm certainly going to help you if I can. If you decide to play some Amber Steel, let me know. Anyone at the World Championships, because I definitely like to see them on top. Cindy Storm Strength is my kind of calling card. So till next time, everyone, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take this to your store championships. This one's a lot of fun. Good for best of 2, good for best of 3. Very aggressive and a slight variation on something you might have been practicing for a while already. And yeah, ton of fun. But until next time, see you guys later.